Hi everyone, welcome to PH 532. This is all about planning, implementation, and evaluation. It's one of the classes that kind of brings everything together. Since you've already had me as a professor, you kind of know most of my details. For this online class, I'll have online office hours Wednesdays 3 to 4 p.m. and then my usual Zoom link. And in general, what I'll do for the week is have materials posted by Tuesday night. And then most assignments are due Sunday night. But of course, always check the syllabus and your email from me or from Cougar Courses for any updates. But I'll always try to send out weekly emails like I normally do. So always check those for updates and also the syllabus for when assignments are due. And remember, there always might be some supplemental discussions or evidence of writing labs that I may ask you to turn in while I'm doing mini lectures, but of course it'll also be in Cougar Course. So just make sure you're really keeping up with the mini lectures and looking to see what might be due for that week. So for this class, as I mentioned, it kind of brings a lot of what you've learned together, and hopefully it also helps with implementing some of your projects, whether it's for your thesis or your capstone. We're really going to be summarizing a lot of the steps when it comes to how to plan projects, how to implement them, and then how to evaluate. We're going to talk a lot about evaluation and more specifically, what methods that do you use, and then how do you develop certain instruments. So largely in this class, we're all going to be developing a survey that everybody will actually take everybody else's surveys. So not only will you develop it, you'll implement it, and you'll analyze it in this class as well. Of course, we always want to make sure we're creating measurable goals and objectives, and we talk a lot about allocation of resources while creating a budget and budget justification. So the main premise for this course really revolves around developing a grant, and that's how we'll accomplish a lot of these learning outcomes. As I mentioned, there is what I like to term a mini grant because it's not the full length, but it does have parts so that you can at least have the idea and feel the essence of what it is to develop a grant. Altogether, it is you're kind of developing an intervention which will serve as a little bit of a pilot study. And then you're also presenting a poster of that pilot study results, and really it relates to your whole paper. And then you have the final paper. So that's kind of breaks it down into the 3 different parts. Oh, I see in this slide the due dates are wrong. So for our class, the due dates are actually in November and December. Sorry, that was the one thing I didn't catch on this slide, which we will see on the next slide. So again, obviously our class is not April, May, but those individual steps 1, 2, and 3 are due in November and December, and I'll go over that in the next slide. But what this is the largest part of the course. It's really a mini grant. And we're going to look at grants specifically at NIH, and that'll help make sure that we're all kind of on the same page as far as requirements for grants. The paper is 5 to 6 pages, single-spaced, because we're going to write it like a grant, but it doesn't include appendices. So we're going to have, a lesson plan, the survey you develop, a budget justification, and that'll be kind of at the end. You're also going to create a poster based on your paper, and I'm just going to ask you to do a 5-minute voiceover presentation, which you can kind of consider your elevator speech. Imagine you are at a conference and you have a poster in person. You generally want to have a 5-minute elevator speech to walk people through your poster. So we'll do that in this class, but instead of being live, I'll just have you do a 5-minute voiceover explaining your poster. But anyhow, the final product, again, 5 to 6 pages for the main sections, include 1-page specific aims, and that one will be the same for everyone, 1 page only, exactly. There's innovation and approach sections. Usually it's about 2 pages. Data analysis, including table shells, which you were able to do for your thesis and capstone proposals. 1 to 2 pages, and then a half page on implications, strengths, and weaknesses. Then again, you have appendices with some of the other materials that you need for this mini grant. Now I have 2 items that are going to be just a little bit different. So what I've decided, since I'm putting this course online, typically you do this project in a group. However, because of the online nature, you might want to do this individually, or I will allow a group of 2. So since this was designed for groups, the way that it is described is for a group of 2. But if you do want to complete this individually, there's going to be a few adjustments so that the pages are just a little less. So for example, what's highlighted is for the individual or clarification. So instead of 2 pages of an innovation and approach, 1 page minimum is okay if you're doing this project individually. And the same for data analysis with table shells, where you're kind of presenting some of the pilot study results. A minimum of 1 page for an individual is fine, but definitely I would have a minimum of 2 pages if you are in a group of 2 people. That way, for those who are doing an individual project, your total pages may be closer to 4 to 5 pages for this assignment, whereas if you're doing this in a group, it should be closer to 6 pages. And the budget will be slightly different for individuals than what I expect for a group of 2. And I'll explain that when we get to budgets throughout the course, and I'll explain maybe a little bit in this presentation. And then after that, we have 3 quizzes, and they're short quizzes. They're actually, oops, another typo. It's weeks 3, 4, and 7. And so this will be based on topics for our course online only that happened before the quiz date. So again, I'm sorry for some of the typos that I just caught here. Of course, refer to our syllabus. The assignments are due in November and December, and the short quizzes are week 3, 4, and 7. Sorry for that confusion, but it's on the next page. Okay, course scheduling and grading, and here's where all the dates are correct. I apologize again. So generally for the class, I'll have a mini lecture. This type of class does have a lot of discussion and activities. So even though, for example, this week there's not a checkbox, I do have one thing that I want you to submit online. So just make sure that you're watching all of the mini lectures and watching out for my emails, which typically has a to-do list, and that's where you'll see that. And then of course we have writing lab to make sure we're progressing through the course and so that you're ready for the final paper. And then of course, as normal on your own, a lot of the reading, studying the slides, and the project work. And so the 3 things for this class that are graded are the quizzes, the project, which is a presentation, poster, and paper, and then of course participation and professionalism. So this is the schedule based on our current syllabus. And as you note, just as I mentioned, the quizzes are week 3, 4, and 7. And your first due date, which is the intervention presentation, is November 17th. The second date, which is for the poster presentation, will actually be December 8th. And then your final paper is due December 14th. And again, I'll always send out weekly emails so that you have those to refer to, and also to kind of do a checklist and make sure you're you have everything that you need for class. So please let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to email or set up an individual time to meet with me as well. So it's always either during my online office hours or by appointment. Okay, so writing lab and or any of the other discussion activities for 532 will really be dedicated to working on the intervention, the presentation you'll do, the poster and the paper, but we're also going to be working with survey, entering data, doing some analyses. So this writing lab and discussion for PH 532 is meant to be a little bit more hands-on. So just wanted to let you know how this course might just be a little bit different, and it has more hands-on practical skills involved. All right, so for this week's writing lab, what I want you to do is identify a grant from NIH. It could be a PA, an RFA, I think there's other acronyms, but a PA is a program announcement. An RFA, which is typically used, is request for, oh shoot, I forgot. Request for announcement or request for, request for applications. So they're asking you to submit a grant. Sorry, I just blanked out for 1 second. But what I want you to do is find a grant that you're interested in. I highly recommend any of the R grants, and actually would prefer everybody look for an R grant. So that would be an R01, an R03, an R21, or any other type of R's. But those are the three main ones, an R01, an R03, and R21. And then there's other variations. So I would recommend those types. Think about something you're interested in. Look for a grant that is at least somewhat related, and really get to know the details of this grant announcement. After you read through everything, determine, what is the main outcome of interest. Now keep it, pretty simple, but one kind of tip is that within a grant announcement, a lot of times they have examples. It'll say something like, I'm interested, or this grant, for this grant, we are interested in projects that look like this, and they will actually list ideas for the grant. And so that's where I would grab maybe some examples that you might want to consider as a main outcome of interest. And then I would kind of start doing a little bit of research, start gathering articles. Eventually within your paper, you're going to do a mini, literature review. So just have some articles that are related to your topic of interest. One tip, especially if you're doing this project individually, I recommend you find a grant with a small budget. And one example is an R03 or even an R21. And the reason is I'm going to have individuals do something called a modular budget versus a full-blown budget, which I will expect of groups. And that way it just kind of reduces the load just a little bit more in case you want to do a smaller budget. Of course, even if you're doing this as an individual project, you are welcome to do the larger, more complicated budget, but I will allow a small budget / modular budget if you are doing this project individually. So that's one advantage for doing this individually versus a group. So I just wanted to have both options given the online nature of this class. So the one thing that I would like you to submit by Sunday night is once you've found a grant that you want to use, I want you to share that with the class. First kind of let me know, is this an individual or group project? So if you're doing the project individually, just put, your name. If you're doing it and there's two of you, just post once and then just put your both names. And then in really short 1 to 2 sentences, what is the general idea and purpose of this grant? Like, this grant is interested in childhood obesity and understanding factors that can improve an intervention. Whatever the premise is of the grant, just have a general, just list a general idea and purpose. And then again, kind of using that trick of what do they mention in the grant that they are interested in? Think about what are some potential objectives and a main outcome of interest. So again, we're writing these mini grants as if you are taking this grant and submitting it to NIH. So that's kind of what we're doing for this class. You might find a lot of old grants that are already done. I will encourage you to look for grants that are active in this moment. There is an active announcement saying we are interested in people to, submit applications to this grant. Those are the ones I kind of want you to target as well. So really think about what are some objectives and, what is the main outcome of interest? Is it weight loss? Is it, let me think, consuming fruits and vegetables? Is it a mental health outcome? What is the outcome what is it that you're trying to change through this grant? What is it that they're interested in? And then within the grant, there's also going to be information on budget and the project period. So as an example, you might have a grant that says you have $100K total over 2 years, or it might say you have $100K minimum or maximum over 5 years each year, which would be $500,000 grant, but over 5 years. And sometimes they're in the millions. Sometimes they even say no budget, but they say, the budget should just be practical. In which case you can say no budget, but give your own. And then think if it's a small study you're thinking about, maybe it's a 2-year project. If it's larger, it'll be a 5-year project. So again, as another tip, if you're doing this project individually, I would stick to smaller 2-year type grants, which are your R03s and your R21s. And if you're doing this as a group, you might want to consider doing an R01, which are typically 5 years and have a little bit more complicated budgets and bigger budgets. So again, try to size it based on whether you're doing an individual project or a project in a group. And again, even if you're doing this individually, if you want to tackle an R01 with a large budget, you're absolutely free to do that. But the minimum requirement, just as a tip, is to have a smaller budget year if you're doing an individual, but it's completely up to you. And then lastly, add a link to the grant announcement. So that way, as you're completing some of the assignments, I can look at the grant to make sure that what you're writing and what you're proposing really aligns with the grant, because that's the goal, right? So you have a grant announcement, you want to submit to it. All of what you're writing about should really align with the interests of the institute or the center that is putting out that grant, and that it aligns with what the grant is looking for. So lastly, when you submit online, you're going to add a discussion topic, and I want you to name it by the topic and the institute. So if your topic generally is adolescent mental health, then also add the institute, which is the National Institute of Mental Health. As you'll see in Cougar course, I have a couple of links that will be helpful for you. One is a link to all the NIH parent grants, and that's where you can see, what are these major grants and, how are they described? So you're kind of learning about the different types of grants. But what I would suggest is actually going to specific institutes. So for example, my go-to is the National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities, which is NIMHD. And they have a section that says, grant announcements. So I'll always go there and look for grants that they are currently putting out. And that's kind of how I search, for me personally how I search for grants. So that's what I would suggest, is go to a specific institute within the NIH and look at what types of grants they have announced. So again, this is our first writing lab. It's more so to find a grant, read it over, and just get to know it, generally enough so that you can complete the one thing that I want you to submit by Sunday night. And again, that's generally, if you're doing this project individually or with somebody else, in very few sentences, what is the general idea or purpose of this grant? What are some maybe just potential objectives or the main outcome of interest? And then also, what's the budget of this grant and the number of years, which is the project period? And then add a link to the grant. So that is all we have for this week. And then again, let me know if you have any questions. Okay, so lastly, to review on your own, there are 2 chapters. They're really introductory chapters on health education and program planning. So I will leave you to review those chapters. They will be on the quiz. And again, feel free to visit me online office hours or make an appointment with me if you have any questions. So please be on a lookout for my weekly emails that has your weekly to-do list. And also for the major assignments, make sure you're keeping up with tracking that in the syllabus. But again, I'll always send these weekly reminders, and hopefully that's helpful in keeping track of what is due for this course. Thanks.